Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I am your host, Andrew Seaman, the LinkedIn newsletter behind Get Hired, which is a newsletter and these wonderful conversations we have every week. As we get started, I want to welcome you and I want to invite you to introduce yourselves into the stream, as I always suggest. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, a little bit about your job search, where you're looking, and also look out for those comments and connect with people. So one of the most important things you could do to help your job search is to connect with other people and network. So you can start that right here by reaching out to people who may be in the industry that you're looking to move into, who may be in a job that you want to join. So keep an eye out for that. Some of the best messages I receive are from people who met other people in the stream and they ended up creating job search groups and helping each other out on their journey. So be sure to do that. And today we have a great guest all the way from Canada. She's going to be talking to us a little bit about resumes, remote working, and also some job search strategy. And of course, taking your questions. So after you introduce yourselves, tell us what questions you have about job searching, especially during these difficult times. And we'll be sure to pick out some of them that will definitely help a lot of you. So let's bring her on. Her name is Adrienne Tom, and she is a job search strategist and executive resume writer, and you could find her LinkedIn profile at the bottom of your screen. So welcome, Adrienne.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And so basically I was hoping that we could start out by talking about a post that you recently put up on your profile, which was about remote working. And I've gotten so many questions about remote working lately. And I think it's pretty obvious to know why, because a lot of people are remote working now, whether they like it or not. But, why do you think there is such a groundswell right now of people looking for remote work? Is it because they like it, that it's good for their livelihoods and their lifestyle? Or is it because they think it's job security, or a combination of all three?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all three. Not everybody loves working remotely, right? But if you do, and you're comfortable doing it, and you've had some practice at doing it, which most of us have at this point, then it's likely something that you'd be more open to doing as you move forward in your career. So I think a lot of people are out there thinking about, if I do want to make a job change, is it viable for me to continue to work from home? And now, more than ever, can I look for opportunities that are outside of my actual city or region and kind of open up the doors to different possibilities that you could have in your career that you might not have been able to have without remote work?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because one of the things that I think people sometimes get frustrated with when they heard about the good job market before the pandemic hit was that, why can't I find all these jobs that people say are available? And a lot of it is geography. There might be industries that are based in certain sections of the world that are not necessarily present in other places. So this almost removes a barrier to that. So that's a great point. And if people are interested in saying, regardless of what I do next, I want it to be a remote position, what should they do and what should they consider before taking that leap? And should it be something that they negotiate with an employer, or is it something where they sort of put up front that that's what they want to do?
I think it depends. So like with anything job search, you need to have a plan. You don't want to jump into it cold and just make assumptions and assume that because you like an organization or you want to work remotely that it's going to be feasible. So you need to start with a little bit of research, identify, companies of interest, and, start researching to see if it is possible to work remotely. For some types of jobs, it's not possible, right? People on the front lines, retail opportunities likely aren't going to ever be remote. But, in different situations, there is good opportunity for that. So your research should help you understand the structure of the organization. Are there people currently working remotely? And that would kind of set you down the path of, maybe narrowing down that target company list for where you can put your focus and your efforts as you move forward in the process. And then the next thing that you want to do is you want to try to find somebody within that organization that you can talk to and kind of get that true insight from, and pick their brain a little bit about, are they working remotely? Is most of the organization working remotely? How is the remote work set up? Again, is it going to be viable for you? And then once you've identified, a company or there is an opportunity and you'd like to, explore working remotely, then you need to prepare what I call as a pitch. And you got to be careful with when you deliver this pitch to the organization you want to be transparent in that if you're working in a particular one city and this position has actually been posted in another city, that you're open to doing remote work. But you'd also want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're still selling yourself as the best candidate, because ultimately what it's going to come down to is, are you the right person to do the job? And if you are, then the company might be more open to exploring the possibility of having you work remotely, even if this role wasn't necessarily posted as a remote position to start with. So it's about preparing that pitch, and then it's about delivering it at an opportune time, right? So maybe you just want to present yourself as the best possible candidate and save that conversation for later in the process. Or maybe you need to be more upfront about the fact that you'd like it to be a remote position and discuss it somewhere like in the cover letter, or in your initial communications with that contact that you have within the organization, so that they're aware and they can help, kind of champion your cause as you go through the process.
I think that's fantastic advice, because I think a lot of people, they're still in that in-between period where they want to secure sort of a remote work position for the future, but it's almost where most companies are doing that by default now anyway. So I think that's all great advice. And before we jump into questions, and please get them into the stream. Again, we're here with Adrienne Tom, who is an executive resume writer and job search strategist, and the founder of Career Impressions. And I am Andrew Seaman, the host of Get Hired and the editor behind the Get Hired newsletter. And we have so many of you joining us from around the world. We have Glenn from Washington, D.C., Crystal from Atlanta, Miguel from California, Linda from Maryland, Kivia from Wisconsin, Chris from Minnesota, Kevin from Austin, Anne from Dallas, and Isabel from Seattle. And I saw some people from Toronto. So it's so wonderful to have you here. Please get your questions into the stream. So let's jump into some of the questions.
Sure.
We have one here from Reese, who is looking to get into corporate work from the restaurant industry. What is the best transition method? And I think Reese is feeling what a lot of people are, that they want to change careers and pivot in some way. So how should people set themselves up for success when they want to make that move?
Right. So that's going to take, a couple of different steps. One is really understanding who you are, right, as an individual, where your strengths lie, and then how those strengths align with that new target. So you said it was from restaurant to corporate. Is that what the transition is for Reese?
Yeah, he wants to go into the corporate world from restaurants, it seems.
Right. So, what is it within your restaurant work that you think aligns or is, related to the type of role that you're looking for? That's really important. Having a good understanding of yourself means that you can better pick out your strengths that are related to that target. I always say you want to know your 3 no's. When you're making any type of job change, even if it's, a straight transition. You want to know yourself. You want to know your audience, and you want to know what matters most. And if you know those 3 things, then you can better package yourself as a top candidate and put together good career communications that set yourself up for success. But then you also need to involve people in the process, right? You need to talk to people that are working in roles that you want to do and that you're interested in, and get them to tell you, what some of those key skills are, what they're looking for, how you can better position yourself. And then you want to see if any of those individuals can help support you through the process, so that you're not doing things cold. You're getting some potentially warm leads through other individuals who can vouch for you in the process, or put forward your application, or better support you, because it can be, a hard transition, especially right now. But if you have people in your corner, then it's a lot easier.
Yes, and I think that's great. And especially you talked about sort of what they can transfer over from one industry to another. And I think that is so important. I always tell people to think of themselves as a basket of skills and not necessarily one thing. So,
Right.
You might be good at video, you might be good at something else, but, that also applies to other industries. So you have to sort of break yourself down into bits and pieces and rebuild yourself in that new industry. So I think that's great advice. And we have some questions here about networking. And I know we got some questions ahead of time about networking too. One from Riz about how do you do that during this time, and one that just came into the stream from Noah. It feels like networking is more important to search out roles in this time instead of applying to job postings. How is it best to network? Does it come down to selling your value proposition? What's the best way to do this?
Right. So it's a good question, Reese. Even though times have changed and we're not able to network face to face as much as we were able to in months prior, the process is pretty much the same. It's identifying people, like I said, that can or work in opportunities that you want to work within, right? Working directly with those individuals to gather intel to help support you through the process. But it's also about building genuine relationships. I think a lot of people get scared when they hear the word networking. They think it's some big, scary, difficult task, when in truth, it's just about having conversations with the right people. It's about getting on certain people's radar. It's about, just building rapport so that if those opportunities come up, you are potentially a person that is thought of or tapped to proceed with that type of opportunity. So really, it's not a scary thing and it's not a difficult thing. It's more about, think about, how you would just naturally have conversations and put yourself out there. So a great place to start is on LinkedIn. Right here on LinkedIn, identify, companies of interest, people of interest. Start engaging on the site regularly, read your feed every day, comment on posts that are relevant to the type of work that you do, share your thought leadership. I mean, Reese mentioned, is it all just about sharing my value proposition? Well, it is, but it's not just about making hard pitch after hard pitch for yourself. It's more about, warming up those relationships and, using it as a two-way street for you to gather information to better support your cause. And then in return, offering value to individuals that will hopefully result in different opportunities.
I think, that's fantastic. And it's one of those things where I always try and remind people job searching is not about one thing over the other. It's about sort of an equation of all these bits and pieces that you have to do to make sure you get to the end goal. So I think that's wonderful advice. Yeah. And I want to move to sort of two parts of the age spectrum now, because we have a few questions and we have a few that came in ahead of time, which are basically, they ask about, this is from Juan and Dina, asking how you get hired as an older candidate and combat ageism. And I know this comes down to things you could do with your resume, which you're obviously an expert at, and sort of your job strategy and presentation. So how do you combat ageism on the older end of the spectrum while you're job searching?
So first and foremost, I would say, don't let age be a barrier for you when you're going out and looking for work. You really want to be confident in the skills and abilities that you bring forward. And again, it's about those 3 knows, really knowing yourself and knowing the audience, and then knowing what they need from you. If you sell yourself as the best candidate, then age shouldn't be a factor. Now, of course, it's going to be a concern for some of the older job seekers. So when it comes to something, let's say like your resume, some of the strategies you can do to, I guess, minimize focus on age is to focus on your recent 10 to 15 years of work history on your resume only. You don't want to go back all the way to your first job in 1981 or whenever it was, nor do you maybe want to put dates for, really early education on your resume. So there's ways you can kind of minimize that focus. And again, employers are most interested in, your recent work and what you can do for them. So you can probably make a really good case for that in your recent employment history. And then just having a lot of confidence in your abilities and not letting the age be a barrier, like I mentioned, and speaking again to the right people. Because if you're just applying for positions online and you're kind of, fingers crossed that I can just go into this cold and be picked as the best candidate. A better way, again, is to circle back to that networking, reach out to people that reach out to people who can help you and see if they can support you through the process. That know, like, trust factor is really important in job search. So if people know you, like you, trust you, then, the age is probably not as big of a concern, nor is your actual, skill level. If you're qualified to do the position and someone can vouch for you in that situation, then that's going to help you in the process.
Definitely. And I think you touched on confidence in the middle there. And I think that's also something that applies to anyone that has sort of this fear about something about them. So maybe you're there because you're young or something like that. If you are self-conscious about that or you're worried about that, it's going to project. So you have to go in there saying, listen, regardless of my age, regardless of, maybe not meeting all the requirements, you have to sort of get into that mindset where you're like, I can do this job. I know I'm a good candidate. And I think that also helps overcome come in. So I think that's such great advice. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have a lot of people who graduated recently into a very difficult job market. And we have a question here from Gabrielle, who says, how can young professionals and students best position ourselves for roles and organizations we want to work for when understandably having less experience earlier in our careers? And I think probably what Gabrielle is picking up on is that a lot of positions say, it's an entry level position, but you need 3 to 5 years experience to apply. So what's the best approach for people who are just starting out?
Yeah, it is tough. And I do feel for individuals in that situation right now. So it's a similar thing, regardless of what age or career level you have. It's having that confidence in your abilities. If you feel that there is, a lack of confidence in an area, it would be good to assess. Is it because you feel like you're missing a certain skill level? Can you level up in that area by doing some professional development? If you're looking for exposure, like to, kind of get your foot in the door because you feel like, listen, I don't have enough years of experience under my belt, maybe you need to do some volunteer work in that industry, or think outside the box of how you can get exposed to, the types of work that you are interested in doing in this difficult time. So it doesn't necessarily have to be unpaid, but it could be, different ways to get those opportunities to kind of bolster your resume. So for example, if you're in early childhood education, there's a lot of parents right now that are looking for support that would probably be, more than happy to bring you on, and you can use that experience. Maybe it's not directly within a school, it's in a home, but it's still transferable, and it can, better position you as a candidate as you move forward and you're seeking out, that kind of those next level opportunities.
Definitely. And, I think so many people I've heard from graduates that said, listen, I had a plan to go to this place or that place and it was rescinded. So I think that's such valuable information for them. And one thing that I also want to ask about is people who are overqualified, because I think the pandemic, one of the things it has done is it has thrust a lot of people into unemployment who typically aren't unemployed. So these are people who are in higher positions, who are considered overqualified, maybe for many jobs. So we have a question here from Reg and Denisha about basically how do you get over the worry about being overqualified for something? Maybe you are an executive, maybe you were higher up in another position. How do you position that when you're applying for a job and also on your resume?
Right. So again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but at the end of the day, it's about having confidence in your abilities and being confident in your decision to maybe take a role of a different level if that's what you need to do during this time, and it's understandable. And then it's about, positioning yourself still as a strong candidate for that role. So it's about, if it's, looking at your resume, it's about writing apples to apples. So that means, if they're looking for these particular skill sets, then you're only going to focus on those requirements within your resume or your career communications. So if the role isn't as at high of a level, then you don't want to address those high level requirements within your resume or your other career communications. You want to focus in on what matters to that particular target and demonstrate that, regardless of what your past work titles were, that you still have the ability to perform at that level, regardless of what that level is. And just, again, having the confidence that you can do that job and not, selling yourself short or feeling like it's necessarily a bad thing. It could be just something that you need to do right now in your career. And that's okay. But you really need to convince the other person, the hiring personnel, that you're the right candidate for the role.
Yes. And like you said, confidence is so key to all of that. Yeah. And because you're a resume expert, you're not going to get off without a few specific resume questions. But so Steve asked before the show, I want to get to this question. I've been told that my resume is great, but I keep getting passed over for jobs. What should I do? I think a lot of people face this where they think they have a great resume. They've been told it, but they still can't get any hooks into the applicant system.
Right. So first and foremost, I'd say, who has giving you that advice? Is it coming from a qualified source? If you're asking your friends, your family, your colleagues for resume feedback, and they're saying, we really like your resume. I mean, they might mean well, but they might not know what kind of modern strategies are necessary for the resume to perform well. So I would, get feedback from a qualified source. So that's someone who has hiring experience, even better, someone who hires someone like you so that they can give you that direct feedback, or, a resume expert who understands, modern resume strategies. And then the second thing is you want to look at how you're distributing that resume. So if you are only applying for positions online and you're not getting the response that you want, then perhaps there is something within that resume file that's not performing at its best. There is a large potential candidate pool for that position, and maybe your resume just isn't bubbling up to the very top of the list for, various reasons. It could be something simple like you're not customizing the resume for every application, and therefore it might look great as it is in a general sense, but if you're applying for a very particular position, then the resume itself may not perform as well because it's not addressing that audience's unique requirements. So then that means if you're only applying online and you're not customizing, well, you could go back and do some customization, or you could even consider finding ways to work around the system, so to speak, and trying to get your resume into the hiring manager's hands. And this is going to come down to doing some research, trying to see if you have any connections at the organization that you're applying for, and see if you can build yourself kind of an internal champion to help get your resume, get an actual person to get eyes on that resume. So an example is my husband actually just secured a new position during the pandemic, and he had found this excellent opportunity online. I believe it was even on LinkedIn. And instead of just submitting his resume through the system, he actually did some research and located a person he actually knew within the organization, reached out, had a discussion, and that person was able to deliver his resume and ensure that his resume was given to the hiring manager. Plus, he then had someone with that like, no trust factor that he built who was able to vouch for him. And that combination, ensured that he wasn't just relying solely on the resume's performance, but it was also getting viewed. And ultimately, he ended up as the chosen candidate. So if you're feeling like the resume is not working, there's a lot of different potential around that. It needs to be, that it's written in the right way for the right audience. And then think about how you're using that file. Who are you giving it to? How can you get actual eyes on it?
I think that's fantastic. And congratulations to your husband. I know you've posted about that on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
so that's fantastic. And then I think that also answers a lot of questions that are in the stream. So Robin was talking about, how do you stand out among all the applications? And
Right.
it's not just relying on the application itself, it's relying on your network and the people that you're talking to. So that is fantastic. And, before we move on, I think I see a lot of people in the stream talking about robots and ATS. So can you give us a quick description of what that is and why it's important, and also why it's important to network to get around them? Because I think there's a lot of misinformation about ATS systems, which are applicant tracking systems.
Right. And you're right. There's a lot of misinformation. And then I think there's a lot of unnecessary worry. So first and foremost, applicant tracking systems are just giant databases that organizations use to gather and organize resumes. And there's a lot of myths out there, or that these systems, they'll disqualify you if you don't format your resume a particular way. And, it can be difficult. At the end of the day, I agree. There's a lot of frustration if you're applying for a position, you have to upload your resume. Again, it's coming back to that, that large applicant pool. Is your resume strong enough to bubble to the top of a very large list? But instead of, like you mentioned, Andrew, instead of just focusing so much on, writing your resume for ATS and ensuring that it's got some sort of magical format to it, you want to write it and you want to focus more on the content of the file. You want to have strong content, because ultimately at some point, the content is what matters the most in the process, regardless if it's, a system looking at it or an actual person. And a person is at some point going to read that resume. And then you want to see, again, can you get a person to read that resume versus just relying on the system itself and feeling frustrated because you're not hearing anything back from this, black hole that you're submitting your application to. So if you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed with ATS, first and foremost, I'd say write your resume very simply. Just take the design concerns out. Yes, you can write a nice looking resume for ATS, but if you're not comfortable doing so, keep it simple, and then really focus your efforts on the quality of the content of the file and getting that file into an actual person's hands, the hiring personnel's hands. And that's going to come down to making contacts in those organizations, doing outreach, getting someone to potentially refer you, or getting on the radar of individuals well before those opportunities even come up.
Great points. And I think one of the things that I always suggest to people too is every once in a while I'll go through not hiring processes, but I'll sort of click through application systems to see how they're working. And one of the things that I notice is that a lot of them will tell you about formatting, about things like that. And a lot of the print it looks like sort of the disclaimer text on the bottom of like most electronic software. So it's important to actually read those, I think, because a lot of it will say like submit it via PDF or document or something like that. So it's worth taking those 5 minutes to actually read, I think, just to give you that extra peace of mind.
Exactly. And follow the instructions, right? At the end of the day, employers, they have these criteria in place for a reason. If you follow the instructions, you can give yourself, a leg up and ensure that, you're better setting yourself up for success.
Yes, great advice. And one of the questions that we have is from Binu, who I think is in furlough and wants to know basically how to gauge whether or not the company will likely be bringing you back. So what do you talk to your manager about? But then also, what should people who are furloughed be doing? Because I know there are a lot of places that did that, and maybe there are people who are still in that limbo area.
Right. So I think that it's going to depend organization to organization. There may be variances. How well is your company doing? Might it recover? Might it not? Because you might not ever really truly know. Even your boss or your supervisor might not necessarily truly know what's happening. I would, just assume if you've been furloughed that you should, maybe put your job search hat on and start the process of looking for another position. You don't want to wait until you get that kind of final notice that, no, sorry, we're not bringing you back. As soon as you're furloughed, you should be starting to kind of put your plan in place for what am I going to have to do next? How can I get up to snuff on current job search strategies? How can I start, rebuilding a modern resume, talking and networking with individuals, and, researching organizations and getting myself out there. I really wouldn't sit back and wait, nor would I necessarily take, information you get from your supervisor as the end all be all. You want to be proactive. At the end of the day, this is you and your career that's on the line. And so you want to do what's best for yourself. And I would strongly recommend getting out there and looking for other opportunities.
Yes, I think furlough, all the people that I know who've been furloughed, when they asked what they should do, I immediately sort of said, don't sit around. The company's moving forward, you need to move forward, and you might find a better opportunity. So we're running out of time, but I want to get two quick questions in. Because two I think could speak to a lot of people. The first one is from Sharon, and I think a lot of people are in this position where they want to return to the workforce during this time. And Sharon basically says, what's the best way to regain confidence as a professional after being a mom at home? And I think a lot of people, they take time off for various reasons. So how do you get back into the game, especially during these times?
Right. So I would say, is your confidence, lack of confidence stemming from maybe your, time away and not feeling a little bit rusty, maybe about your skills? If the confidence or lack of confidence is centered around that, then I would say before you put yourself out there and start looking for positions, to do a little bit of professional development or upskilling or reskilling in different areas. And this would circle back to talking to people, in your line of work. What are they currently doing and using and working on, and what are the job requirements? And if you feel any type of discomfort around, okay, well, I'm not really sure about, doing that right now, or I'm not as confident in my abilities, then this is a great time to start, maybe taking a course. And then this would help, again, with, even padding up your resume, so to speak, as you move forward. You could say something along the lines of, recently completed an updated course on, SAP or whatever it is, that would demonstrate to the employer that, your skills are still fresh in a particular area. Now, if your lack of confidence centers more around, the job search process, then again, before you put yourself out there, I would do some research or work with a professional to really understand modern job search strategies. So if you haven't written a resume for a long time, then you need to get that done. If you haven't interviewed for a while, then it would be wise to do some practice and preparation and mock interviews so that you feel as confident as possible. If you put yourself out there before doing any of that legwork and you're already struggling with your confidence, then you might find your confidence actually declining through the process if you're getting rejections based on things that you might not even be aware of. So really do the legwork up front and then enter the process when you're absolutely ready. And again, you will be able to position yourself as a strong candidate.
Yes, and I think on the other end of this, I think this question ties into, and this from Heather, and I saw a bunch of people say, "Great question, Heather," so that's why I want to get to it. And if you take a break, maybe from your career, or maybe you're jumping into a new field, a lot of people say, "I don't know people at target companies. I don't know a lot of people in that field." So she basically says, "How do you approach outreach if you don't know people at that company?"
Right. So, it's going to take some time. So, give yourself some grace, but it's also going to take some research. I think, again, LinkedIn is a great tool for this type of situation where you're researching companies of interest and then you're trying to identify decision makers. And it's coming back to building those relationships. If you don't have those contacts, then you need to build them. And that does take some work and effort. It can be something as simple as logging into LinkedIn and following these different, potential decision makers and getting on their radar by, commenting on their feed or positioning yourself as a thought leader. And you're going to find slowly, as you start to build those relationships, that you're going to find yourself introduced to different people along the way. And so it's a process. You're not necessarily just going to be able to, call someone and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in a job. Would you hire me?" You've got to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, and, put some time and energy into identifying the right people and fostering some sort of genuine relationship with them. Because every relationship starts from somewhere. And even though someone else might have a really large network with lots of contacts in it and feel like they have a leg up, if they're not actually engaging regularly with that network, then they might still be starting from the same square that you are.
Yes, it always starts with that initial outreach. Yeah. And my suggestion is always sort of whatever the ask is, it needs to be proportional to your relationship. So, if you message someone and they say hi, don't immediately respond with, "I need a job and can you get me one where you work?" Okay. So you have to build up to that. But
yes, that's really important. I would say, yeah, keep your asks, like you said, I love that, in proportion to your relationship. Don't make big asks right out the gate. Foster it. It's something that, it's like a slow burn over time that you can build up to. And you might not necessarily need to make asks so much as just, create some sort of rapport so that you are on that radar for those potential opportunities.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as saying, like, "Hey, listen, I want to work at your company, or I want to work in this position. Tell me about your days. What are the pain points? Be specific." And I think also what's so great about that is that even if you can't make that ask about, like, "Can you give me a referral? Can you pass my resume along?" which will turn people off. If they are in part of the process, which at a lot of companies there is sort of a hiring committee, they might say, "I remember Jane," or "I remember so-and-so did reach out to me." So it doesn't hurt just to have that initial conversation, even if they're not going to give you that referral. So I think, never hurts. And thank you so much for your time and joining us, Adrienne.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should watch the bottom of the screen. We have your LinkedIn profile, so I hope everyone follows you. You post such great content. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for doing this series. I think you add a lot of value to the career industry right now, and I really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. And I can't do this without the help of the LinkedIn community. So I'm really appreciative. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for joining us. I saw a lot of you saying that you really enjoyed the show, and I have good news for you. We do this every Friday at noon. So be sure to come back. And even on Monday and throughout the rest of the week, my colleagues are here on a show called Business Unusual, because business is unusual during these times. She'll be talking about the perks of actually being in an office. So maybe if you're looking for a remote job, this will give you something to think about maybe you do want to have the option to go back into the office. So tune on into that for Monday. And as I always say, be well, be safe, follow the recommendations of your local health officials, because you can only be a good candidate and you could only get a job if you are well enough to do so. And then also be sure to take care of your mental health, and remember that we're rooting for you. I know job seeking can be a lonely process and a difficult process, but we're rooting for you. A lot of people in the stream are rooting for you. So just keep that in mind, and I'll be back here on Friday with another guest. So join us. And then until then, best of luck and be well.